What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another exciting episode. Today we're going to be talking about the swimbait reels that I use in basically every situation possible, from fishing smaller swim baits to the medium to the large, soft baits to hard baits, and basically everything in between. So if you guys are ready, let's get right into today's video. So of course, when it comes down to swimbait fishing, one of the biggest things that guys are always asking about and wondering about is, well, what kind of reel should I get for this or for that? And so today I'm going to kind of go over how I've chosen my 5 swimbait reels for basically all of the swimbaits that I fish, from baits that are 1 ounces all the way up to 10, 12 plus ounces. And so you guys have kind of more of an understanding of why I choose things the way I do, and hopefully it'll help you choose what you're looking for in your own fishing. So we're going to start kind of small, and then we're going to work our way up in size. So the first reel that we're going to look at is one that's actually come to me within the past year and a half, and that is this guy right here. This is the Shimano Bantam A reel. This is the newest version of the reel. And the reason why I picked up this reel was solely because I was looking for a reel that was going to handle that 1 to 3 ounce range that I could throw on like a 7.2, a 7.6, a 7.9 swimbait rod that's fairly light in hand, that's going to be able to throw like a Tiny Clash or any of those like 2 ounce glide baits like a Gancraft 178, something that's small. And this reel came to me after actually picking one up and fishing one that one of my buddies had, and I was actually genuinely shocked by the feel of this reel. Even though it is a small reel, it's probably like a 150 size reel. This reel is actually really solid when you get it in hands, and that's because this reel is a metal body, so it's going to feel a lot heavier. This thing is 7.6 ounces, so it's going to be much heavier than your traditional 150 size reel like a Steez or a Zillion or anything like that. But because of the feel in the metal body, it truly does feel really solid when you put it on a swimbait rod and you're casting around a 2 ounce bait. It truly does feel like it balances out the rod with the lure hanging at the end really well. And I've come to really love this Shimano Bantam. The line that I've put on this reel is anywhere from 16 to 20 pound. I normally live on that 16 pound, and it holds a pretty good amount of line overall. Now, after, let's say, 3 or 4 trips of retying a lot and doing whatever, the spool definitely starts to decrease with the line capacity. So then I have to kind of re-spool quite often, but I do that anyways. So kind of just a thing to think about when it comes down to these smaller reels, that once you start retying as often as you should when swimbait fishing, you're going to start losing a lot more line, and you're just going to have to re-spool to keep that spool at a much higher rate. Obviously, again, it's a smaller spool, so we're not going to be throwing, soft baits down in 40, 50 feet of water and long lining. You're just not going to have enough line for that, really. So this is a perfect reel for the smaller glides, the Tiny Clash. I have the XG version, which is the high gear. This is the 8-to-1 gear ratio, so I can fish the glide baits effectively when I need to fish them on this lighter setup. And overall, this reel is absolutely killer. I'm absolutely in love with it. Very shocked by it, honestly. But so far, this thing has been absolutely badass. Now, going up in size to what I'd almost classify like a 250 size reel, and it's another Shimano, and one of my favorites for sure, and that is this guy here. This is the Shimano Interus DC Monster Drive. This just so happens to be the 2018 version. And I've had this reel now for years and years and years, and this thing is absolutely badass. Now, this reel is a reel that lives on my Clash 9 rod, which is a DRT or a 2 rod. Super light rod, very crisp. And this reel paired up with it is absolutely perfect. It throws that Clash 9 super well. And realistically, even though it is like a 250 size reel, I'm not a guy that's going to be throwing 6, 8 ounce lures on this reel. I just don't believe that it was made to throw that size of bait. Can you do it? Absolutely. My buddy Jared over in Texas, He'll throw 250s on it. He'll throw the Ghost on it. He'll throw a bunch of different things on this reel, but he does go through those reels really, really quickly because of that. This reel, even though it is a monster drive, it's still a fairly small reel. It's got smaller gears, even though they are larger than like a normal Interus DC would be. It still doesn't mean that you can throw these absolutely giant swim baits all the time and wear them down. This reel really is perfect for anywhere in that 2 to like 5 ounce range. And again, this reel lives basically on that 4 ounce range with the Clash 9. But I've thrown a wide variety of different baits on this, from a tiny Clash. I've thrown like some of the smaller stuff, like some of the soft glides on it, and it handles it really, really well. Obviously, if you're not used to a DC, when you first cast a DC reel, your first cast, you're like, holy shit, my reel's broken. And then you're like, oh, right, it's a DC. So if you're not a huge fan of DC, I definitely cannot recommend this reel. But overall, it's a dream reel, and it's a perfect reel for that, again, 2 to 5 ounce swim bait. And again, this reel I have in an XG, so it's in their faster gear ratio, just so I can keep up and work that glide bait as well as it possibly can. And overall, it holds a pretty good amount of 20 pound. I'd say it definitely holds more than that Bantam, and that's kind of why I classify it in that 250 range. And overall, this has just been an absolutely solid reel for me. I actually just picked up the new 2023 version, and I'm excited to go out and fish with that and see how it compares to this older model. But so far, this thing has been absolutely solid for me. I've had zero problems with it. I've only taken it apart maybe 2 times ever to have it like serviced, and it's still super smooth, still casts like a dream, and it does everything that you'd want it to do. So this is that Shimano Interus DC Monster Drive. Okay, and by far the absolute sexiest reel I think out there on the market is this guy here, and that is the Daiwa Z2020. This just so happens to be the Depths Limited red one, the Depths collab. This reel is just unbelievable. I've owned the Z200 before. That's just the American version, and it was honestly a dream reel of mine, because in all the pictures I ever saw of this reel, I was like, dude, that is one of the sexiest and coolest looking reels I've ever seen. And I can still say that it really is one of the coolest reels out there on the market. There's definitely a lot of negatives to this reel, but the positives are actually pretty high. It's a low profile reel. It's fairly light, but it feels rock solid. So I can throw that 6, 8, 10 ounce swim bait on this reel and feel pretty good about it. But yet it doesn't feel like a giant swim bait reel. It feels really good in hands, especially when you pair it on like an 8-foot extra heavy or an 8'6" extra heavy swim bait rod. This reel goes absolutely perfect on any of those rods. Now, you might be thinking like, oh, what are the cons to this very high-end, very expensive reel? Well, the way that I treat my Z2020 is how you'd probably treat like a Ferrari, where it's not a daily, you're not driving it to work and back every single day. You take it out on occasion. You might only be driving it for 30 minutes top when it's beautiful out, 70 degrees. Like, you don't want to mistreat this reel, because once you start mistreating this reel, it tends to have problems. One of the biggest problems is that the clutch goes out on these things like crazy, and it can be semi-hard to find replacement parts because this is the Japanese version, and sometimes you just have to really dig deep to find some of these Japanese parts for these reels. And so it can be kind of a pain in the ass when something does eventually break. It might be a headache, 1, just to find the part, and 2, the cost of it and then repairing it yourself. Like, it might be a total pain in the ass. So realistically, I don't fish this reel that much. I might fish this reel, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. Like, and that's basically it. And this is basically my dedicated Depths 250 reel. This is the only reel that I throw the Depths 250 on nowadays, which again, I only throw that bait maybe 5 or 6 times a year nowadays. And so this thing has held up perfect for me, but that's only because I use it so very little. But when I use it, it feels great. It casts the baits far. It feels solid when I'm fighting a fish, and it's just super sexy. So That is the Depths Z2020. It's just an absolutely fantastic reel. I believe this Depths Limited one was like a higher gear ratio than like a normal Z2020. I believe it was an 8-to-1. So they kind of went up in the speed on this one. So that's the deal. This thing is super, super sweet. Now, sticking with Daiwa, another reel that's semi-new to me, but has been absolutely killer for me, and is kind of my staple nowadays, is this guy here. It's the Daiwa Tatula 300. Now, this reel has been absolutely solid for me. It checks basically all the boxes that I've been looking for. My buddy Mike Gilbert, he was trying to like put me on these like maybe a year and a half, like 2 years ago. And I was like, I'll try one out. And when I tried one out, I was genuinely shocked by how solid this reel is and how it has been. I now own 4 of these reels. I own 2 6s, I own a 7, and I own an 8. The 6s and the 8s get absolutely worked every season because these reels, they don't see a lure normally under 4 ounces, and they've been absolutely rock solid. I've thrown 4-ounce baits, 6-ounce, 8-ounce, 10-ounce baits on these reels, and they've been absolutely solid for me. They got great castability, still super smooth even after like 2 seasons now with them, and I've had to do no cleaning so far on these reels, and they've been super, super solid. A reel that won't break the bank, I think it's the cheapest reel that we've talked about at $289, which is still kind of high, but nowadays when you think about swimbait reels, it's priced pretty okay. But what I found on the aftermarket, if you go on like the forums or the Facebook groups, you can find a lot of these Tatula 300s in either new condition or lightly used for under $200, which is a really good price actually for something like this. The 300 here at Tula, it does feel pretty big, but it feels like a true 300 size swimbait reel when you put it in hand, especially when you pair it up on an 8-foot extra heavier swimbait rod or an 8.6 extra heavier swimbait rod, and you're throwing that 6 or 8 ounce swimbait. It really does pair really, really nicely on that rod and setup. And again, it casts super smooth. It's a smooth reel so far still. I can't say enough good things about this Tatula 300 so far. I mean, it's been an absolute workhorse. That 8-to-1 that I normally fish, I'm throwing normally like the Hinkle trout on that, which is 10 ounces. And the one that I have currently, it's still going super, super strong. I think I've only serviced that one myself maybe one time. It's been an absolutely amazing reel. It feels great on any of the rods that I pair it up with. And it holds what I would say like the perfect amount of like 20 or 25 pound line, just kind of depending on the brand that you use. And what I mean by that is we'll get more into that on the next reel that we'll talk about. But when you spool this thing up all the way up, you can get quite a few trips out of it before you think like, I should probably retie. I'm getting really close to like the end of my spool when I make a super bomb cast, like the wind to my back, right? So I can get probably 5, 6, 7 trips out of like one spool, which is not bad actually, especially how much I retie. And so this reel holds a perfect amount of line. It's not too heavy. I mean, it's definitely a heavier reel, but overall it's been an absolutely fantastic reel. It holds just the perfect amount of line to where you don't feel like there's too much line and you're kind of just wasting line by just being backing at that point. And so the Tatula 300, I can't recommend it enough for those guys looking for that 300 size reel. It's just been super, super solid for me. Now, last but not least, the oldest of the reels that I've had, and that is this dinosaur. This is the 2015 Shimano Calcutta Conquest. This is the 400 size. This thing is an absolute unit, I tell you what. But this reel I've had now for close to 6 years now, and I've only serviced it maybe 2 or 3 times ever, and this thing is one of the smoothest reels still. I mean, I'm genuinely shocked by how smooth this reel has lasted me. It does screech every once in a while, but again, you put a little bit of oil in it, put it back together, and you're super solid again. This reel has just been absolutely killer. My first ever double digit came on this reel. I've caught so many soft bait fish on this reel, it's just an absolute killer for me. It's a staple. As much as I want to retire it and move on to like those Tatulas, I just always keep this thing in the rotation just because of the sentimental value with this reel. This reel is a dedicated soft swim bait reel, and I'm throwing anywhere from like maybe like a 7-inch Citizen all the way up to like the 12-inch Tyrant or the Mag X, which is 12 inches. You know, these giant soft baits, and the reel has absolutely handled anything and everything that I've thrown at it. It still casts an absolute mile, still super smooth. And the reason why I really, still to this day, I like that round reel for soft baits is because I've always felt like when it comes down to choosing whether it's a round reel or a low profile, is the action that you're going to be doing with the lure and how comfortable that's going to be. So I have, you know, decent sized hands or whatever, but when I'm fishing a soft bait, I'm basically holding it like this. And I've got basically my whole left hand kind of gripping around the reel. And so when I get that bite, I've got such a good connection with the reel, and of course the reel's attached to the rod. So when I get that bite, I feel like I get such a good hook set, and it just feels much more solid than what I would do with like a low profile. Just because when I'm fishing a glide bait, there's a lot of this going on, like, you know, and this starts to get uncomfortable once you start adding movement. Now, this is just me personally and how I fish glide baits, and there's just this and that. But if you're fishing a glide bait like a Butch Brown, where, you know, that would be fine. But the way that I'm working a glide baits like this, and this reel, it's just way too uncomfortable for that, just because of its tallness and its roundness. But when you're just holding it, it feels super, super good when you're fishing that soft bait. And so that's kind of how I've always chosen, whether it's going to be a soft bait reel or a glide bait reel. Basically, almost all of my round reels that I own are all dedicated soft swim bait reels. Obviously, I've thrown like the Hinkle trout on this before, but that's kind of more like a slower like glide to it. But I still always prefer like a Tatula or that Z2020 to throw it. It just feels more comfortable in hand overall. And so that's kind of how I've chosen. You can obviously throw a glide bait on like the newer Calcutta, which is a 7-to-1, which is kind of insane that we've gone from this reel, which is a 5-3-to-1, to the 2018, which was a 6-2-to-1. And then now you have this I think it's a 7-1 or 7-2, like super fast. And they've basically built that to be a glide bait reel, but I just don't understand. I don't know a lot of guys that do throw glide baits on this round reel. I don't know if Shimano was like, oh, well, you know, the biggest name in swimbait fishing is Butch Brown, and he throws a round reel on his 250, which is a glide bait. So we're just going to keep bumping up the gear ratio on these reels. And the reason why I like that 5-3-to-1 is because when you're fishing a soft bait, you don't want to go too fast with it where you're coming up off the bottom and you really have to slow it down. With this 5-3-to-1, I can keep a pretty like regular retrieve and maintain that bottom contact, which is really important to me. But if you're kind of just casting around or whatever with like a mag draft and you're not really fishing on the bottom, then a 7-1 can be fine. But when you think about a lot of these soft baits, or at least some of these soft baits, they can be finicky on the retrieve. That if you go too fast, they start to like roll or blow out and they don't get the right action. So I'd rather try and speed up than try and slow down on reels when it comes down to soft baits. Now, the big problem that I have with this reel is that it is a 400 size reel, and that means it holds an absolute shit ton of 20-pound fluorocarbon. I mean, it's an absolutely ridiculous amount of line on this reel. So what I've ended up having to do is put some mono backing about halfway on the spool, and then I'll top that with my normal fluorocarbon. And it's insane that I'll do half of that spool, put on 20-pound, I can make a bomb cast, long line it, and still have like 40 yards of line on this reel. I'm like, dude, this is so much line, and half of it's mono, so it holds a ridiculous amount of line. So I almost wish I had gotten that 300 Calcutta Conquest, but you know, at the time, all the swimbait guys were throwing the 400, so I was like, well, I gotta get a 400 too. But once you get past that and you put backing on it, whether it be braid or mono, this reel has been absolutely solid. So that's kind of one thing to think about when you're gonna get like a 400 size reel. You're gonna either want to put backing of some sort, or I mean, sure, you could put the whole spool of 20 pound if you're fishing for some ridiculous fish that will just absolutely peel drag and you're scared to get spooled. But other than that, the backing will save you, and you'll absolutely love this reel. I know a lot of guys don't really throw that 400 size reel. It's not as popular as what it once was, just because the 300 kind of just can do anything and everything. It has enough line for long lining, has enough line just to make short little casts, and so the 400 doesn't feel like it's a very much needed size anymore. But for those guys looking for that and wondering about it, there it is. That's the Shimano Calcutta Conquest 400. So those are the reels that I kind of live with. There's other reels that I've used in the past that I've absolutely loved, like this old guy here. This is the Garcia. This is the Garcia Big Shooter. It's a pretty old reel, but for what it was, and when I got it fairly cheap, and it was an absolutely solid reel. I threw basically anything and everything on this reel. I mean, one of my all-time favorite reels ever. I mean, it just did everything super well. It held enough line, it casted far, it was smooth, it was strong, and it's been an absolute workhorse. There was a couple problems that I've had with this reel. I believe the drag washers kind of got destroyed, some other like problems with it, but other than that, I mean, this one here, this is kind of the original one that I've had since maybe 2016 now. So 8 years of this reel, and the last time I used it was the season of 21-22, and I was catching Hinkle trout fish on this reel. So super solid reel, really the only Abu that I've ever really liked, and it's been super solid for me. But you know, you don't have to have these extremely expensive reels or anything like that to get the job done. When I first started, I started with the Shimano Cardiff 300, and I threw anything and everything on that reel. I would throw the 1 ounce baits, I would throw the 6 ounce baits on it, I would throw glide baits with it, I threw soft baits with it, I threw basically everything on it. And that reel, I don't know, you can probably find them now for $80, $100. That reel surprisingly still is really solid. And I remember at the time they were so cheap that if you kind of went through a season, like you would probably get 1 year or a year and a half out of one of those reels. You would kind of just trash it and go buy another one because they were so cheap. And those are still available out there on the market. It doesn't seem like guys throw that reel anymore, but I mean, it was such a solid reel, and with enough patience and understanding, I was able to even fish like a Clash 9 on it and catch quite a few fish on that old school reel. But it just kind of goes to show, like, it doesn't really matter. But the reason why I have these reels now is because they help my fishing be a lot more comfortable and be a lot more proficient. Obviously, you could have just one reel do everything, but it might lack in one aspect of this or one aspect of that. And so having a decent range of swimbait reels will help you in the long run of having like specific setups and things that feel comfortable as an angler and when fighting, casting, and doing the whole process that is fishing. If you guys have any other questions about swimbait reels and stuff like that, leave a comment down below and I will get back to them. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode. See you later.